Everybody, can I start with a quick question? Who's seen a 3D film before? 3D movie? Okay, who's not seen one yet? Right, okay, that's interesting. When I started asking that question at the beginning of the year, when I first started doing these things, you probably get about 50-50, maybe less, actually seen a film. That's actually about 70%, which is interesting over less than a year. If I did the same thing to a bunch of kids, you know, sort of school kids and what have you, nearly every hand would go up, because there's definitely a big interest in it amongst the younger folks. Right, I'm going to rattle through a brief introduction to who I am and what I do. I won't dwell on that too long. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of 3D, where it's come from. I'm going to explain some of the basic principles with 3D and some physiological aspects about it, which might explain why perhaps some of you have not been terribly comfortable with 3D films that you've seen and the sort of things that can go wrong. I'm going to cover display technology, why this television is slightly different from most of the ones you'll see for 3D. I'm going to talk about the cameras and a bunch of other stuff. There's quite a lot of it, and I'm not quite sure what level to pitch it at, but I'll rattle it through. If you've got any problems or any questions, then please feel free to ask me. I've also got some movies to show you. I'll break off periodically. I'll show you I've got two 3D cameras here today, which I'll wave around and show you what they look like. And I'll show you some locally shot movies, Somerset and Bristol, which is where I work basically. So my name's Neil Richards. I'm actually not a long-term filmmaker. Most of my background has been in microelectronics. I've held a number of technical and senior positions in various chip companies around the world. But I've had a lifelong interest in creative stuff, art and photography and stuff like that. And I decided to set off on my own, and I wanted to set up a company that was a combination of technology and creative activities, and hence I was very interested in 3D, so I set up the Digital Film Company. We do all sorts of stuff, not just 3D videos, 2D videos, photography, a bit of music. I'm a musician as well, and training, do various training on 3D and other things. We've done quite a bit of work, done some work with schools in Somerset about looking at using 3D for kids, see how they get involved in that, whether they can create their own content. That's still running on. Done a lot of 3D test shooting with this camera and other cameras locally in Somerset and Bristol. We entered the 0117 film competition when the M Shed opened in Bristol this year. There was 50 entries, 34 made it to the door, 30 completed in 5 days, making a film from scratch. We were the only 3D entry. I'll show you that film a little bit later on. Run some training workshops, some digital cinema work at the Watershed, put some films into Depict, again all in 3D, and we're doing some commercial and music video work as well. So it's quite it's a nice topic actually, because there's quite a diversity of interest and possibilities for it. So 3D's actually been around, stereo 3D, I should be careful about what I say here, but stereoscopic 3D has been around for a very long time, at least a century. It goes back to the late 1800s, and a lot of the work was in the early 1900s. Of course, in those days, it's mostly done with film. The initial investigations were all using photographs to make stereo images. Famously, it was used by the RAF when they were overflying Germany for bombing targets. They took stereo pictures to get elevational information on rocket sites and things like that. It had a resurgence in the 50s with horror films and horrible B-movies in 3D, monsters coming out of the screen at you. That was done with what was called anaglyph, red-green glasses, which have various limitations. And again, it was all done using film. And one of the problems with using film was actually trying to get a good enough mechanical alignment between the two projectors. Latterly, with all the digital technology coming out, digital TV and digital cameras, there was a big boost of interest in this in the 90s and early 2000s. Mostly it was anaglyph, and latterly it's become stereo, what we see stereo TV, and of course with HD coming out and all the other stuff, it's really taken off relatively recently. So at the moment we're in a position where we can watch a very high quality 3D picture. It's there at the cinemas. It's at the local cinemas. You can go to, even Burnham's got they've got 3D at the Ritz there. But this is really the first time we've been able to properly watch 3D movies outside of a cinema.
You can buy, this television for example was 800 quid, you can get 3D TVs starting at 450 these days, so they're not a lot of money. And they give you a very high quality picture. But the real growth I think is going to be in glasses-free 3D mobiles, laptops, netbooks, smartphones even, you know, so if you've got an LG or a Samsung phone, I don't, you can get glasses-free displays on glasses-free 3D displays on those, and I think that's going to drive quite a lot of interest. With the fall in price of cameras and availability of cameras, it's cheaper to make the movies, and you've got a whole choice of ways of distributing those movies in discs and Blu-rays, but also via the internet with YouTube 3D and things like that. So, you know, in my opinion, last year when I got very excited about this, there's a lot of creative business opportunities that are likely to emerge from it. Where's it going to go? Don't know. I'm not going to dwell on this too much, but all the general trends that are going on in 2D filmmaking apply equally to 3D. So the current hot topics are going for super high definition, 4K and 8K cameras and so on. Very high frame rates beyond the 24 frames per second that you see in most cinemas, going to 48 and even higher. There's people experimenting with that. High dynamic range is another one where you get a much more sort of film-like or eye-like quality. These are all obviously very expensive technologies at the moment, but will come through. And the holy grail, if you like, is for 3D is a screen this size which doesn't need glasses. But that's still a good few years off yet, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. Right, I'm going to stop there for a minute. I'm going to show you a movie. Okay, so would you like to see a 3D movie? Yeah. Okay, so I've got some short, a selection of short films. I'm going to try and intersperse. Can I have some glasses? I've handed them all out. Thank you very much. Right, let's see what it looks like. I'll talk to you about the formats for this a little bit later on, but these are all stored on a USB stick. They're just ordinary QuickTime.mov files which I've generated. Unfortunately, I have to. That's the wrong one, Neil. I don't want that one. Sorry, minor technical hitch. Hang on, I need to get the USB stick. Come on. For some reason, it's not giving, typical, it's not giving me the menu for the USB stick. What it's doing is, hang on. Let me go there, I'll probably do it from there. In some of the, that's better. In some of the live 3D modes, the TV doesn't give you access to some of the menu functions, unfortunately, and I'm still learning out what those are. Right, okay. So here we've got a USB stick. I've got a bunch of things on here. Let's start with this one, since I've got two members of the audience who are quite keen to see this one. This is quite long, it's 5 minutes, but it might be worth a look. I shot the Carnival in 3D for the first time this year. I did it in Glastonbury. I wasn't able to get around all the rest of them, but it was just an experiment to see what it might look like. So I'll show you that one. Sorry about the message there. Sorry, it's a very rough edit. This was actually the first float that I photographed. The exposure's not quite right. I was experimenting with it a little bit, so this is a bit hot, this one. Okay, not the most riveting film because basically it's little more than a test shot at the moment, but it was also shot very conservatively from a 3D point of view. So my first question is was everybody able to see the 3D okay? You saw a bit of depth to it. There's actually not a lot of depth in that because I was so paranoid about it that I set it actually quite safely. Because there are things that you can do when you make a 3D film which can annoy your audience, and not only annoy your audience, but you can actually cause them physical discomfort. So I tend to shoot fairly safely from that point of view. So in order to understand that, because there's no particular stereoscopic problems with that film, I'm going to show you a couple of my other ones later on where there are problems, and I'll give you a bit of theory first so you can sort of see what the issues are with them. So I just need to run through first of all and explain to you about how stereo 3D works. So a bit of theory and stuff here. So the first thing to understand is what your eyes can and can't do. So we all generally have a pair of eyeballs. I have some friends who've only got one eye, so stereo is useless to them. But anyway, we can look side to side fairly easily most of the time. We can cross them, depending on how much alcohol we've had, it becomes easier. And we can look up and down. And that's basically it, apart from focusing, in terms of what we can do with our eyes. Now, there are some things that our eyes can't do. Divergence is one of them. We can't open our eyes outwards more than actually about a degree or so. We can't move them up and down independently either. So when it comes to shooting a film, we have to be careful to make sure that we follow what the eyes can do, and we don't try and get our viewers' eyes to do something that they can't, because that will hurt. So if I use this sort of fairly standard everyday flying teapot as an example, then essentially with those three basic movements of the eyes, that's everything that we use to perceive the world around us visually. Each eye gives us a different view of the world, and from that the brain, in a very clever way, which is only partially understood, builds up a model of the outside world and fuses it and creates a 3D image. So the important thing to remember is that 3D is actually built in your brain. It's not to do with your eyes directly, they're just the receptors. So some terms I need to bring in, using our standard modern mail as an example. Convergence is the first one. This is a very commonly used word in stereo 3D. When you cross your eyes on something, they converge as opposed to diverging. And the point where that focus point meets is called the convergence point, which is important to us because that's where our center of attention follows when we're watching something. Now, it's important to know that if our eyes converge on an object here, any other objects in the universe that are either in front or behind will display what's called parallax. Now, parallax is the double image you get if you focus on something closely and keep looking at it. If you kind of let your attention wander around the things behind you, you'll see double images. There's a very easy way to look at this. A background object will display parallax like this. If you hold your finger in front of you and look at it, bring another finger behind it, but don't change your focus or your point of attention, and you'll see that you can make the finger behind appear as two on either side of it. So that's an example of parallax. And that's positive parallax if the finger is in the distance. If you bring the finger in front to do the same thing, then you get two finger images either side of your main finger. That's called negative parallax. And the brain is actually capable of determining where that is relative to you depending on how the images are swapped over. So we can do the same thing on a camera. Here's my camera up here, my main camera. We can adjust the toe in of the lenses optically, and we can cause the two images in the camera to converge on a point. So the important thing about that is that where the convergence point is, that's where the TV screen will appear to the camera. So any object which you converge on will appear to be here at the screen plane on the TV, and that's the first fundamental thing to know about filming in 3D. If we change the convergence point, effectively the screen plane moves closer or further away to the camera and to the viewer. So that's an important thing to remember. So why is all this important? Well, because if we play with the convergence, we can fool the brain into seeing 3D when it's not really there. Okay, so we control the convergence point of two cameras. They can either be in one unit like that, or we can have two separate cameras to create a parallax, effectively. The parallax, when projected onto a screen, is interpreted by the brain as being in front of or behind the screen, even though it's not. And so when we watch this as a TV or a movie, the convergence point at the screen seems to be the screen surface, and any images in the picture that look like they've got parallax, the brain says, oh, they are behind or in front of the screen. So it's a trick, basically. It's an optical illusion. So some other things to think about. Two terms which sometimes get confused: interocular and interaxial distance. Inter obviously means between. Ocular is your eyes, so the interocular distance is the distance between your eyes, which varies as we get older. Interaxial is the distance between a lens, so it refers to a camera. So if we've got two cameras on a stereo rig, for example, like on a slider, then in this case we can vary the interaxial distance according to how we want to shoot the picture. If we have a fixed interaxial camera like the 3DA1 that I have, that's fixed at 60 millimeters, which incidentally is the distance of an adult human. So this camera is set up to give a view of the world which is very similar to what a grown-up sees as they're walking around. Some smaller cameras, I've got a consumer camera here, have interocular distances of 30 to 40 millimeters. There's reason that's about, by the way, that's about the same as a young child, sort of 8-9-year-old child. It's about that sort of distance. The advantage of having this closer interocular is that you basically make the parallax smaller, and you can get much closer with a smaller interaction. You can get closer up to your subjects. So that's a restriction on the main camera I have. And generally speaking, you can use large interocular distances for things like, if you want to get a 3D image of clouds, for example. I know a guy who took two cameras and put them 30 meters apart to get a nice stereo picture of clouds because they're a long way away. You can go very, very close in. If you have a very, very, very tiny interaction of just a few millimeters, you get a mouse's eye view or a bull's eye view of the world, and everything will look gigantic. But the range for humans is 40 to 60. There's something else we need to understand, and that's something called the depth budget. I'll tell you why we have, a little bit later, why we have maximum allowable limits for the parallax that we have. I'll get to that in a moment. But if you take it as given for the time being that there's a set of guidelines, if you like, or not hard rules, but guidelines about what is comfortable for people to see from a parallax point of view, then because of simple geometry, having two eyes or two cameras, then this gives us limits. And this range, if you like, is called the stereo depth budget. And that's the range in which we want to shoot as filmmakers, so that when we finally display it on the screen, we're not going to cause any discomfort for our viewers. And that can all be worked out analytically, or if you can't be bothered to do that sort of thing like me, you kind of go out and shoot empirically until you start to get a feel for what works and what doesn't. If we bring the interaxial distance closer together, which incidentally is the same effect as if you pull to do a wide angle, then you can increase the stereo depth budget before you cause discomfort. And if you go a very long way, get your eyeballs really close together, then you can shoot from close up to infinity without bothering anybody. There are some other effects of this as well, which I won't go into just at the moment. So let's think about a little bit further. If we're going to go filming, what do we have to think about? We have to think about the human side of it, which I've just gone through. But there's some other things we need to take care of mechanically and as filmmakers with the cameras and with the equipment. There are a number of sources of errors that you can be introduced by the equipment. Disparity is one. I'll go through these in a moment. What are called edge violations and other types of violations. There are some rules for good and bad 3D, and some rules of thumb to generally sort of make 3D work reasonably well. Some things to avoid. So just running through this very quickly, disparity results because the brain actually is very, very sensitive to differences between left and right images, left and right eye views, if you like, of the world. Vertical disparity is the distance, the difference between the left and right images that the brain is receiving. So this camera produces a left and a right full HD picture. When we present it on the screen, you need to make sure the two images are very precisely aligned. In fact, to 1 pixel. You can tolerate a little bit of difference, but it should be to zero difference really, because the eye will detect it. Rotational disparity: if one one is rotated relative to the other, that kind of makes your eyes feel a bit funny. You can detect that. Color and luminance differences, less of an issue with an all-in-one camera like this where it's all synchronized, but if you have two cameras, you need to make sure that your exposure and your color settings and your color balance is identical between the two. And in fact, even differences in the lenses will make a difference. So when Cameron and all these other people go and shoot big films, they're using matched cameras with matched lenses and everything, which is why it's a very, very expensive thing to do.
Can I ask,
sure.
With the white balance of like the human eye, is it always the same in both of our eyes?
Yes, as far as I'm aware, unless you've got unless you have a visual impairment of some sort. Okay. I mean, people's eyes are not completely identical, but as you go through life, the brain tends to, I believe, tends to work around it. You know, in the same way that people with one eye are still able to not walk into things. They have other ways of detecting 3D. But the interesting thing is that some of the issues that people have had watching 3D films recently, where they've complained about it, they've gone and talked to ophthalmologists and other people, and they've discovered that actually, in many cases, there's an underlying vision problem that the person has, which was only manifested when they went to watch a 3D film. So it's not all bad. You know, sometimes they've been able to correct some problems. So keystoning, that sort of distortion, you have to be very careful, especially two cameras on a rig. Mechanically setting them all up and getting them accurate can be quite painstaking. And polarization, the worst is light bouncing off water, the sea or something like that. It scatters and you get different polarization. Sunlight sparkles off water, for example. They will land on the left camera and the right camera differently, and you will see that as a kind of a slightly odd discomfort when you watch the film. And the classic one, simple things: dirt, raindrops, insects. I had a shot ruined when a little midge flew past the lens like that, but it didn't go far enough away that it was safe. It actually just went quite close to one lens, and there's nothing you can do about it unless you want to go through frame by frame and try and remove it. So you have to be very careful about things like that as well, and keep a close eye on it. Violations, you have to avoid visual paradoxes. The classic one is an edge violation or a window violation, which is more noticeable on small screens like this. You won't see it at all on an IMAX, for reasons I'll explain in a moment. A classic thing would be, let's say we set the convergence point on this lady here, and I'm going to interview her, so I stand here, classic over-the-shoulder interview technique, okay? So we're having a chat, and that's all great, and then we take it back and we put it on the TV, and what we find is that because I set the convergence point here, she's quite comfortably on the screen, but I am over here. So I appear to be out of the screen, somewhere like this, and that's fine. But the only problem is that the camera's only got half of me in. So half of my head appears and my shoulder appears. But it appears to be out of the screen. But when you watch it, your brain says, ah, that guy's out here. But the screen is telling me that it's cut him off. So that means he must be behind the screen. But he's not, because the parallax is telling me it's out here. And you go, and it's very uncomfortable. And so you have to watch those with objects that come out that are in negative space out the front. I have to remember that as they come out, to make sure that you don't chop them off with the screen. The reason you don't see it at IMAX cinemas is because the screen is so large that it fills your entire vision and there's no edges essentially. So they don't have to worry about it too much when they shoot. But if you're shooting for small screens, you've got to be aware of it quite a lot, and it affects the way you frame the picture quite fundamentally. We also have to avoid the physiological impossibilities. We don't want divergence. We don't want lots of jumping around causing people to waggle their eyes around all the time. And we need in order to do that, we need to avoid breaking our maximum parallax rules. These are the ones that set the stereo budget, the stereo depth budget. So we have to keep the parallax to within human physiological limits. Now what that means is that the maximum parallax that you can have on a human is 60 millimeters. If you try and have the two images moving apart, left and right, superimposed, and the parallax is greater than 60 millimeters, then you're telling the viewer that you've got to open your eyes wider than parallel, which they won't do. So that's what sets the maximum parallax budget and what's comfortable. So we want to do that to reduce eye strain and headaches, and poor filming, poor editing in big cinema ones, especially the early 2D to 3D conversions, resulted in some bad parallax issues and other violations, and that's why people complained about them. So they're all generally avoidable, but it takes quite a bit of work. You have to work within your depth budget. So you need to think about your display size. This is a bit of a pain. The smaller the screen gets for a given amount of parallax, as you go to a smaller screen, the parallax scales down, and it doesn't look as round, it doesn't look as 3D. So generally speaking, tiny screens like Nintendo 3DSs need to have exaggerated parallax in order to give you a nice 3D effect. As you go larger into big cinema screens, then you don't need to do that. You can have smaller parallax and it will still look okay. So this actually involves a lot of extra post-production work to do that. The rules of thumb generally are less than 5% of screen width for your maximum parallax. But Sky 3D's rules are actually 3% or less, and the big cinemas sometimes only use 1% on a large screen, so they keep it very, very small indeed. But you can break these rules if it's for short periods of time if it's appropriate. You can get away with more on a TV. Typically, I'm sort of 4% on some of my stuff, 4%, 5%. For certain shots, so you don't do it all the time. And generally speaking, you put the convergence point on your primary subject or whatever's appropriate. Okay. Like all filming, lighting is critical. It can enhance or reduce your perception of depth. It's another clue that the brain has in terms of whether something is 3D or not. Lighting your foreground subject really well and putting the rest dark gives you a very good sense of perspective, and contrary-wise if you do it the other way around. Another thing is that if you just look at a static 3D shot, your brain kind of tends to get used to it. It doesn't always see that it's, oh, that's a dramatic piece of 3D, that's wonderful. It will sort of say, well, yeah, okay, I'm just kind of used to that now, and it starts to look flat. But if you use a bit of motion, so if I did a tracking shot here across you guys, what I'd get is occlusion of everybody, and that's another clue, 2D filming technique to get a depth impression. So jib sliders and dollies are your friend for your 3D work. The other thing is that what's been found with 3D films is that people generally spend longer around. When you present them with a 3D film or image, the first thing they do is they start wandering around. They don't just look at the primary subject. They say, "Ooh, that looks interesting," or "What's going on behind there?" So they wander off, if you like, and this means that people enjoy doing it. They like looking at all the other things that are in the scene, which they normally wouldn't get to look at. So they actually prefer to have longer cuts. If you go for very fast cuts, like modern music videos, it can get very irritating and frustrating for people because they don't have time to look and see what's going on.
Do you think that's maybe just because it's a new technology?
No.
And that might not happen in future?
No, there's two reasons for it. One, people are getting a lot of information from a 3D picture, a surprisingly large amount because of all the depth information. But the other is, as you move from scene to scene, the convergence point may change. So when you change convergence points, you have to physically move your eyes, and that takes time. So if you go from very close up to out there, it might take you half a second or something for your eyes to relax. So at the end of every scene cut, you have to allow time for the viewer's eyes to move if you're changing convergence point. I think one of the animated films got around this by filming with the same convergence point all the way through, so the viewers didn't have to do that. But Will?
Like you could do a focus pull, can you do a convergence pull then?
Yes.
In a scene, you could draw the attention of the audience from one set further back or further in.
Yes, yes, you can do.
The audience will follow that.
In fact, if you watch most feature films, when they're filming, they're being so precise about it. They're not only pulling focus, they're pulling convergence, and sometimes they're pulling the interaction as well, because they're filming on very big mirror rigs, and they're actually varying the distance between the cameras as they're doing the shot, and that's why they have 4 people per camera to operate them. So if you want to go for the real top-end high-quality stuff, that's what you need to do. You spend $250,000 per camera, and you have teams of 4 and 5 per camera, and then you put 10 cameras or 20 cameras on, and you've blown your $100 million budget fairly quickly. you don't have to do that. I was intrigued to learn whether I could do it with a camera like this, which doesn't require that you do that. And generally speaking, I don't adjust the convergence during a shot. I set it for the shot, do the shot, and then change it. But that's because I'm doing the whole thing myself, so it's a bit limited in terms of what I can achieve. But yes, you can do all of these things, or you can choose not to. It's up to you as a filmmaker. What it does suggest actually is a slightly slower, more old-fashioned, more leisurely filming technique. It remains to be seen whether filming techniques, as people experiment with the whole medium and everything, whether they introduce massive depth of focus controls and stuff so that people can't look at the 3D environment around them so much, and therefore they can't wander around, and then you can go back to doing it. But the problem with that, I'd suggest, is that you're losing a lot of the information and appeal of 3D, because you're losing that information in the picture. But we have to see how it goes. It's a style choice in the end, potentially. So this is what I don't like. This is classic what's called theme park 3D. Avoid jabbing your audience in the eye all the time. You can do it occasionally, but don't do it all the time. It's so tiring because you're forcing, you know, lots of convergence changes, and the audience reaction is to jump when something comes out at them like that very rapidly. And it's great if you're having a theme park ride for a couple of minutes, and ooh, it's really good. But if you do it for a 90-minute film or a 60-minute documentary, it's very wearing. So if you watch my films, I sometimes have stuff coming out of the screen, but I tend to shoot more like a window into another world. But again, some people think that that's missing some of the opportunity. Sorry.
Have you seen the new Christmas Carol that was shot in 3D, sort of animation with Jim Carrey?
No, I haven't, not yet.
Because how do they do 3D animation, like you said?
Ah.
You talk about with
Actually, it's much easier to do 3D animation than it is 3D, I would suggest, than 3D live action. Because what you basically do is, with animation, is that you generate left and right views all the time. And you can do this in the computer. So you can create in After Effects or whatever your 3D space, and create the stereo pairs, and you have virtual cameras. So you have a left and right virtual camera, and you can do whatever you want with them. You can put them wherever you want. You can have multiple cameras. You can have as many as you want. So you've got much more control in the computer doing a CG animation film over the 3D than you have shooting it live, where, you know, people will cross in front of your camera and flies will go past you and all that sort of thing. And they cost money, so you're limited to one, you know, a small number of cameras.
The linger time, does that mean that set builders' jobs are harder? They have to actually make sets that people are going to look all around and explore the screen?
Potentially, yeah. Potentially, they've got to be a bit more careful about it. It's the same way with HD, by the way, in TV. Going from standard definition to high definition has made attention to detail of presenters and so on much more important, because the camera picks up absolutely everything, you know, skin blemishes and stuff like that, which you wouldn't have seen on earlier TV. All of a sudden you can see, and that may be true with 3D as well. Is that you may be paying more attention to what's going on behind, and you need to cover up some things a bit more. But okay, use negative parallax very carefully. As I say, I prefer to shoot deep, but that's a style choice. Occasionally there's instances where it's useful. Watch for convergence jumps. I mentioned this before. This is where you go from one scene to another, and you're forcing the viewer's eyes to pull in or relax, depending on what you're doing. It takes time for the eye to respond, and it's actually, when you jump in, your eyes actively pull in, your muscles pull your eye in, so it's faster than when you jump out and go from close in to out, because the muscles simply relax, and it takes a little bit longer to go that way. So if you watch a movie, a big Hollywood movie, they actually do this. They smooth the convergence between one scene and the next. So in the same way that you might do a dissolve between one scene, what they will do is in post-production they will adjust the convergence. They'll start automating it and move it so that your eyes start to follow as you go from one scene into the next. And of course, on a 90-minute movie with tens of thousands of cuts, that's an awful lot of post-production work to go through. Or you can cheat and use a dissolve, which I do sometimes. Right, I'm going to talk about displays next, but I was going to show you, how am I doing for time, by the way? Can I show another film?
Doing all right.
yeah.
Okay. I'll show another short film then as a break, because you don't want to hear me droning on all the time. Having gone through all of that, I'm going to show you the M-Shed movie, which we made in 5 days. Basically, it was turn up at the M-Shed on a Friday morning at 10 o'clock, and you got 2 hours to wander around and be inspired by something, and then go away and script, shoot a film, edit it and deliver it by Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock. So 117 hours to produce the movie. Now in that time, it was quite a challenge to get a 3D movie together in that time. So what I'm going to show you is what we delivered. It is possible to fix some of the errors that are in it, but I'll just play it through and see if there's things in there that you think are not quite right about the 3D. So we have to go through this again, unfortunately. Now, our little movie is called Tourist Drive, and we decided that, given the limitations we were working under, that we would we'd make it about the staff. What inspired us was actually the people that put the museum together. So we interviewed them on the bus, essentially, that's in the M-Shed, the old Bristol bus, and asked them to tell us what they liked about the museum, and then we went off and filmed it. So this is what we did. The rules were it had to be no more than 2.5 minutes long, with 15 minutes of credits. So it's a 2-minute 45 movie, and if I can see where the start button is, we should be ready to go.
Till about 1400, Bristol was the beginning of Archery. Flying became possible from Northchurch 9,307 Windsor Royal Open Courtyard was opened in
What I wanted to create in Bristol is a museum that explains the city, and capturing that in one museum has been quite a challenge, but I think we've cracked it, I think we've done it. People just looking at everything and doing everything that you've created is just amazing, absolutely amazing. You feel a bit sort of like glassy-eyed because you're like, oh, everybody's enjoying it.
Yeah.
The creative side of Bristol, which spans the centuries. And because this is a museum essentially of people's stories, what we asked her to do was to illustrate the whole trade, the triangle of trade.
And it's just a tiny 6-layer chevron.
She used a lot when she was at Bower Ashton in Bristol. Then she moved on to Seabridge.
We've got a lovely dress on display, Italian dress from southern Italy, given to the museum about 20 years ago. I managed to get back in touch with the family who'd given it. They could tell me all sorts of things about their grandmother, Maria Policella, who came to Bristol in the 1920s, and the dress represents people coming to Bristol and the growth of Bristol through migration.
I said, well, have you looked at the book? And she said, oh yeah, what's that about? And I said, it's this book that's found in human skin. And she went, really? It just looks like leather. It's green with gold writing on it. Cutis viris Johannes Hallwood, which means the real skin of John Hallwood.
I'm a biologist by training. I really like creepy crawlies. And Bristol's full of them, heaving with them. We freeze-dried one. Do you know freeze-dried coffee? This museum has freeze-dried spiders.
Cheers, drive!
Traffic lights. Bristolians love traffic lights. We've got 400 sets of them in the city, but the ones we've got in the museum are really special. They're the first pelican crossing to be installed anywhere outside London.
Right, so that's got some faults in it. Can I ask the audience, were there any bits of that were uncomfortable for you?
The bit where you kind of, it's kind of like a crane down across one of the balloons. Obviously you've got the edge of the screen, and then suddenly when it becomes the foreground, when it
Yes.
It's fully in the middle of the screen.
Yes.
Your eyes and they go
That's one example. The other, a classic one to watch out is walking through a door, where you'll get the same thing. Is you'll get the door frame, and then all of a sudden it will cross the edge, and if you're not careful, you'll get a window violation there. Anybody get any others? Any other bits that you didn't like?
The spider, the close-up spider, I think. Was a bit...
You would not believe how many hours I sweated to even get that as good as it was, because the filming in the M Shed was incredibly challenging. There was 2 of us with no lights. It was natural light, and the M Shed is not very bright, so a lot of that was shot with 22 dB, 24 dB maximum gain on the camera, which is why it's a little bit grainy. But we were also, in some instances, like the spider, we were breaking the minimum distance shooting rules of the camera, and pulled a few tricks in post-production in order to make it work. I mean, the parallax on that was a quarter of a screen, essentially, and we got away with it because we lit the spider but not the background, and tried to defocus it as much as we could. So we zoomed in and made a very short depth of field, so that the background fuzzed out, and then we just manually moved it across and zoomed everything up. So that's massively enlarged compared to what it was, but there was about an hour and a half of work at 3 o'clock in the morning to even get that to work like that. So you know, you'd do it a different way if you had the chance, but you know, we had to do it all in one day basically. And any others that people spotted?
The reflection of that girl's face in the glass, was there something going on with the layers of glass? And
yeah. There's again we were very close in, and what we were trying to do there was there were other bits of framing in that which caused edge violations, so we had to frame it in a certain way, and we got it as best we could. But the problem was that there's labels on the window which were inside the minimum depth range of the camera. So again, it's been finessed a little bit to make it work. We were quite pleased with the way it came out, but it's just ever so slightly not quite right, but generally it's all right.
My eye saw that reflection just slightly offset from, you know.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, the post-production on that has been to try and make her, to get the whole scene generally okay. If I corrected it for her, then other things close to the camera would blow out, and that's the problem. Once you've shot it, it's kind of burnt in unless you're using very, very sophisticated stuff. So there's a couple of others. The handlebars on the bicycle. That again was a constraint. They're actually out of the screen, and as we start to pan, there's an edge violation at the side and the top as they go out, and that jumps out. That's the worst one as far as I'm concerned. There's another one where we're interviewing Julie when she's in the bus, and the people are stepping out. There's a guy with glasses. They're all the same. Just stepped off and walked straight into shot, and he actually walked within a metre of the camera, and he should have been no more than about sort of 4 or 5 feet away. So that as he stepped into shot and walked off, there's a big edge violation, but we get away with it. Most people don't spot it. We get away with it because it was only a fraction of a second, and that's what I mean. You can break some of these rules, provided it's done briefly or in such a way that it doesn't cause discomfort. Okay, so anyway, that's what you learn. How many for time? I'll run through a bit about technology. Am I okay?
Yeah, we've got about another 5 minutes or so now.
Okay, right. So I'll just
10 actually. I think you'd be cool.
10. Okay. So I'm just sort of going to run through the technology a little bit, and I'll wind up by just showing you the cameras. I'll go through this very quickly. There are different types of 3D display around, and it's useful to know what these do. There's different formats for TVs and computer monitors. They basically split into whether they're active shutter or passive display technologies, which I'll go through in detail, or glasses free. And then there's 3D digital cinema, which is slightly different. So the main categories of image formats that we've got, the main one is frame packed. I'll go through these in a bit more detail in a moment. Frame packed, where you've got full HD left and full HD right image. That's what this camera produces. Two outputs, bang. It's what you get out of a Blu-ray disc if you buy a Blu-ray disc. There's side-by-side, where they're packed into a single frame side-by-side, top and bottom. I'll go through these in detail. Interlaced and checkerboard, these are the main ones. So frame packed is basically as good as you can get. It's an HD image, or it might be a 2K or a 4K image, and for each eye. Side by side is where basically you take each one and you cut its resolution, horizontal resolution down and put them together like that into a single frame. This is how Sky transmits, for example. It's how Freeview will transmit. Top and bottom, which actually is better for passive displays like this one. You leave the horizontal resolution together and you crunch the vertical resolution. Same net effect. There are two interlaced formats, horizontally interlaced, which again suits passive displays. And what they do is they take the left and right pictures and they basically interlace them on alternate rows. Okay, and that's how this one works. And there's vertical interlaced, where the left and right columns on a pixel basis are interlaced. And that's how glasses-free displays, lenticular displays like this one, which you can have a look at afterwards, that's how they work. Checkerboarding is not really used very much for commercial monitoring, but for on-site location monitors, high-end broadcast monitors, they basically checkerboard the left and right images, and it's great for doing editing and post-production and checking your image balance, because you can see chrominance and luminance differences between the two very easily. So FramePact is the most common output from professional 3D cameras and rigs. It's the way we do 3D Blu-ray and digital cinema, but it's a problem for broadcasters because it's twice as much bandwidth to transmit, and they can't get that over a standard TV channel. So what they do is they use side-by-side. All the stuff that I've shown you today is side-by-side, by the way. It's most common, despite the fact you're only getting theoretically half the resolution, but the brain actually makes up for quite a lot of that. It's easy to edit and it's easy to transmit, and it's used by the BBC Wimbledon trials, and this little camera, the consumer camera here, does it like that as well. Top and bottom is good for polarized TVs because they're polarizing alternate rows, lose half the vertical resolution anyway. So if you do that with top and bottom, then what you generate is what you see on the TV, and it's actually better than using side by side.
When you say losing resolution, are you timesing 1080p by 2 and then going back to 1080p, or are you actually getting half 1080p?
Each left and right is getting half of 1080p. I think there's a bit of a myth about this.
1080p.
Yes. Yes, by the time you've stitched the two together, you're still watching 25 frames per second, 1080p. So I actually argue, I've disputed that you're actually losing resolution because you're watching it just the same as you would if you're watching a normal HD movie. So it's no worse than an HD movie. But the two, you're actually getting more information because you've got stereo depth information, which you don't get in a flat one. So I think it's a bit of a commercial argument, a marketing argument, really. Interlaced, as I mentioned, for polarized TVs like these, and so on. Now, glasses. I'll quickly run through this, and then I'll start playing with the cameras. This is the familiar red cyan glasses, popularized in the 50s. They filter out basically, they color process the left and right, stick them on top of each other, and then the lens simply focus out the more bluey one or the more reddy one, depending on which eye you've done. I find them quite difficult. I've never had really good experiences with it. The color rendition is always affected, which I don't like. But they are ridiculously cheap, and stereographers use it all the time just for doing quick checks on an ordinary monitor. You don't need any 3D technology. The shutter glasses, Samsung, Panasonic and people like that, this is the one most people are familiar with TVs. They have basically an LCD shutter which goes on, off, depending on whether the TV is displaying left or right. So it just flickers between the two. So the left blanks when the right image is on, and the right blanks when the left image is on. It's doing that at 120 times a second. It theoretically it does give you the best image quality because you're watching twice normal HD rate. So you get full HD for both eyes. But they're the most expensive glasses. They're the heaviest. The batteries and consumers are kind of, not sure really about that.
Can I ask, what are they selling that? What are they calling that resolution when they're selling it? Are they calling that
full HD?
But what kind of resolution are they talking? Are they saying that's double 1080p?
It's effectively you're getting double 1080p, but it's a bit marginal. There's a lot of debate about it, but you are actually getting much more than just a normal HD 25 frame per second frame rate. So there is more information going in that way. You can see it actually. You can see the difference between an active shutter Blu-ray versus just one of the others. But The most common one, the ones that you guys are using at the moment, are passive glasses. This is a polarizing system. This is what you see in most cinemas, RealD 3D glasses. All they do is the left and right are basically interlaced on a row basis, and the screen has a polarizer on it in long strips. So basically, the first row, the plastic polarizer will left polarize the image, and then the next row of pixels will be right polarized. And when you put the glasses on, one is left polarized, one is right polarized, and that's all there is to it. It just filters out to each eye the polarized the polarized light coming off the front of the display. Dolby have a slightly different system which uses a wavelength filtering, but you don't see that on television, so that's only used in cinemas. Theoretically, the HD image, as we've discussed, is half HD per eye, but the net information into the brain is still an HD image. The glasses are light and cheap. I hope you found that they're actually not too onerous to watch. And they're best for light because they're not blocking off half the light all the time. They're actually, they're actually quite good in terms of brightness for the picture. Autostereoscopic 3D is an area that's making all sorts of interesting leaps and bounds at the moment. For large displays like this, it's very expensive, £8,000 to £10,000 for a screen to do it, and it's got all sorts of limitations, but there's some interesting technology. A company called iPont has got a means of taking Blu-ray and displaying it onto these displays. Again, technology development, it will get cheaper over the next 3-4 years. There's an issue with how many camera views you need to set it all up, but again, there's ways around that. More likely to be useful for small flat panels where typically you can hold it in the sweet spot. You know, you're holding your smartphone, you're holding your tablet, and you can fit the sweet spot of the glasses-free display. And you can have a play with this one later on. I think this is going to be quite significant because it will appear in a lot of mobile devices and potentially creates a market for online 3D content through YouTube and other things like that. The cinema, nearly all UK cinemas are digital. The majority support 3D, sort of 70–80% I think now, something like that. But it represents a massive opportunity, in my opinion, to indie filmmakers, this whole change that's gone on. Because the standards for digital cinema enforce an access point for what's called either local content or alternative content. And it's basically either a gigabit Ethernet connection into the servers in the cinema or a hard disk drive. Basically, it's as simple as that. So all of a sudden, there's a way for indie filmmakers to get into the cinema network because they don't have to go 35mm film. They don't have to go through all of that stuff to get their their films out there. So as far as I'm concerned, this is a massive open door for local content. You know, you can generate either a 2D or a 3D film, put it onto a hard disk drive, and if you've got a friendly local cinema person, they can ingest it into the server, bang, and off you go. Most cinemas are dual projector. There's 3 standards. There is an active shutter one, the Expand 3D, which is what the Watershed uses. They're actually active shutter glasses for the whole cinema audience. Passive polarized is the most common. And then there's Dolby, which uses a sort of a wavelength filtering system. It doesn't matter what it is, what the projection system is, you don't need to worry about it to a certain extent. To deliver your content, you need to create what's called a DCP, a digital cinema package. This was standardized about 3 years ago. Basically, you put a full left and right image into a file in a format called an MXF file. It's compressed using JPEG 2000, and when you put it on a drive, it's ingested into the servers in however you connect to it. And then they can play it. The servers will munge it and put it out onto the projectors. Do Re Mi from France has got the biggest number of installations, but there's Dolby and other people that supply that. So I'm probably out of time at this point. Have I got another couple of minutes?
Absolutely, yeah.
Is that all right?
Yeah, of course.
I was going to run through the cameras, and I was going to do that by just showing you basically what we've got. Making 3D movies is obviously, big studio stuff is very expensive. This is a typical kind of studio or film studio mirror rig. You've got 2 red cameras here on a massive beam splitter rig. They're at 90 degrees to each other, and there's a big, very, very high quality mirror here. So the light is coming in, and it's basically being 50-50 split between the left camera and the right camera. Now, they're a pain to set up, they're a pain to use, they're phenomenally expensive. The reason they use them is because they give you ultimate control over everything. You can control the interaction, you can control absolutely everything out of these things. So, you know, to get the very, very best quality filming, that's what you do. But, you know, you're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars per camera and a very, you know, large and experienced team to drive it. There's simpler ways of doing it. You can build your own slider and put your own cameras on. There's various commercial ones you can buy, or you can make your own. Very simple, just add 2 cameras. But the problem here, of course, is that you've got to be very careful about aligning the cameras together, because the alignment issues will result in disparity. And if there's any disparity, you're going to have to sort it out in post-production. So you may move your time production issues into post-production. You can shoot parallel, essentially, and then adjust the images in post-production to a certain extent, which can make things a little bit faster. Yeah, disparity correction is a masochist delight if you've not got a motorized rig and all that sort of stuff. You can do this with movies or with still cameras, by the way. And there are Sony and other people for broadcast use have got these digital processors which will take the feeds from 2 cameras, and they can actually in live real time adjust all of the disparity correction stuff like that. If you've got £30,000 to spare for each one, again, it depends where you are in the tree. As I mentioned, these are the best ways to mirror rigs are the best way to get the ultimate sort of picture. But they're pretty time consuming and cumbersome. But there's a low cost one from a guy named Alistair Chapman that Genus are now making, which is about $8,000, £5,000, and it will take small, you know, small modern cameras on there. It's light enough to go on a standard tripod, so it's quite an interesting thing. It's manual, so you've still got to set it all up. Commercial consumer cameras. I bought this one a year ago. There's one here. This is the Panasonic one. This is basically a consumer camera with a lens adapter on the front. It's got certain constraints, but I've had this for a year, and I've got 2 of them, and I've used those for close-up work. Quite neat. There's some better ones now, I would argue, from JVC and Sony, about £1,000 to £1,500, where they've got twin lens and you can zoom and do all that sort of stuff. So as it's HD, there's things like 3D still cameras out. Fuji, Sony, and Panasonic have all come out with twin lens still cameras. There's an adapter. I've got a GH2, and I bought this adapter so I can take HD 3D stills with it. And then we've got things like the 3DA1 over here, which do effectively a professional job. It's light enough that what appeals to me is it's light enough to fly from a jib. I can drive it as one person. I get a good quality output from it. I can handhold it. And because it's all interlinked internally, I don't have all the disparities set up every time I go shooting. So I can take it out, turn it on, bang, off I go. So it's pretty good. They've got a big brother coming out, which is the 3DP1. This is 23,000 euros, I believe, when it comes out at the end of the year. But this is aimed at broadcasters. It's ABC Intra, you know, full whack. Go around and film events and sports and stuff like that. That's broadcast quality output that they can send out. Sony have got one as well. I saw this one last week up in Manchester. This is about 2 weeks away. Panasonic have just brought out a baby brother to the 3DA1, which is the Z10000, and this should be very interesting to colleges and what have you if you want to get into this. It's ABC HD. Same sensors as this camera's got. It's got a zoom on it. It's smaller, so you can get close up with it. It's got a macro function. But the key thing is it's 2,700 quid list, so you probably see it cheaper than that on the street. Available next month, and I think that's going to be a really good cam for people to get in at a prosumer sort of level to go filming. So that's it, and I was going to stop there. I won't go into post-production. I think that's a topic for another day, so I'll probably overrun.
What software you use for post-production?
Yes, Final Cut Pro, Final Cut Studio 7, and a plugin from a company called Dashwood in Canada called Stereo 3D Toolbox. And there's 2 versions of it. There's LE, which is about 60 quid, which just gives you basic geometry correction and disparity correction. But if you buy the full one, like I've got, you can do all sorts of wacky things with it. So. But there's others. There's you can get Cineform Neo 3D for Adobe CS 5.5, and if you've got 100K to spend, you can get a a Mystica rig or a Quantel box that will do all sorts of fancy things that I can't. So, but there's a bunch of them coming out. Sony Vegas 10 will edit it as well. And there's something called Stereo Movie Maker, which is a kind of a shareware one as well, which runs on PCs only, although I've managed to get it running on the Mac. And that gives you sort of basic 3D editing capability as well. So there's more coming out. It's quite an active area. So as more of these cheap cameras get out there, there's more software.
Will that take you to the output of like showing it for like a projector?
They're good enough to give you output like this, sort of side by side, which you can show on a TV. If you want to do to generate something for a cinema, it's a different kettle of fish. I've built a sort of a semi-custom flow to do that, and it's quite slow. Otherwise, you have to go to Soho, and they'll charge you, 10,000 quid to do it. But I'm trying to set up something that will allow me to offer it as a service locally for people who want to do it for much less than that. So, but it's work in progress at the moment.
Neil,
sorry, Phil.
No, not at all. It's really fascinating, and I hate to bring it to an end. And actually, what I'm going to say was, we will formally bring it to an end. And thank Neil very much for coming.
Yep.
We're really lucky to have Neil nearby, and we hope we see a lot more of you, and we can see a lot more of you can see a lot more of us as we go along.
Happy to come down again. Yeah.